All right, everyone. Welcome to Rebel Wisdom's Becoming a Live Player. This is our 7th workshop in the course, and this week is our practice week on third-person play. And we're going to have a session today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Tomorrow is going to be on epistemology play, and then the fine folks from Street Epistemology will be visiting us. And Thursday will be on rationality play. And CFAR, the Center for Applied Rationality, will be here. And today is on mental model play. And I'm very excited to be co-facilitating this session with my dear friend and Stoic partner in crime, Daniel Kazandjian. Daniel is a Toronto-based product manager. He's an executive coach for getting things done and building a second brain. And he's the co-founder with me of the world's largest Stoicism meetup group in Toronto, Canada. So yeah, Daniel, thanks so much for being here with me. And is there anything you'd like to add to that intro?
No, nothing to add. Really excited to dig into today's presentation.
Yeah, so how today's going to work, Daniel and I are going to present for about 15, 20 minutes on mental model play. And then we'll have a Q&A, short Q&A, followed by some exercises. And then we'll close off with some shares. And for the Q&A portion, if you have any questions anytime, just put them in the chat. And then Daniel and I will call on you. You can ask your question or just share your thought. And this video is going to be posted on the STOA's YouTube channel, in addition to being in the part of the Rebel Wisdom course. So if you don't want to be in YouTube, just indicate that and we'll kind of read your question or statement on your behalf. So that being said, I will share my screen and we will begin. Okay, mental model play towards becoming a live player. So what is a mental model? I will tag in Daniel now to explain it.
So, to put it simply, a mental model is a representation of how something works. And what I want to highlight in this definition is that it's a representation. It's not the thing itself. The map is not the territory. And we are emphasizing utility here. We put in this aphorism from statistics. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. Statisticians try to remind themselves of this. But this is also going to be relevant for us. All mental models are wrong on some level because they're representations, but some of them are useful. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about the models that we think are the most useful, but more importantly, we're also going to talk about how to actually use them. So if you go to the next slide, I have a few examples here of mental models. The point of this slide is to help with your pattern recognition. I imagine many of you recognize a bunch of the mental models here. Maybe there are some that you don't recognize. I'm going to highlight a couple of them. So anti-fragility, for instance, it denotes systems that actually improve from exposure to shock and volatility. And knowing that can really help you recognize the difference between fragile and anti-fragile systems in your personal life, in business, etc. On the right hand, we have bounded rationality, which we've learned from behavioral science, which shows that our ability to rationalize is in service of whatever emotional context we find ourselves in. So many of you know that when you're angry, you tend to use rationality in service of anger, and you'll come to angry conclusions. When you're happy, it's a little bit different. Your planning might be different, etc. And then I'll point out one more. So this is a really common one, the Pareto principle. It's also known as the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the outcomes are due to 20% of the causes. This can help you focus on the most essential actions when it comes to a project. Let's say you have 10 items on a project list. Maybe 2 of those items actually get you 80% of the way there. Another funny one is 80% of the clothes you wear have to do with only 20% of your wardrobe. And so those are some general examples. Next slide.
All right, so Memetic tribes, all Memetic tribes have mental models. So Memetic tribes is a mental model that I coined in my Culture War 2.0 white paper. And definition would be a group of people who cohere around a complex of memes or a memeplex and perhaps get a sense of tribalism because of it. And some examples are like New Atheists, Metamodernists, Antifa, alt-right, intellectual, dark web, Me Too, kind of anything from across the political or philosophical spectrum. And two or three that we have here. Two of them are going to be with us tomorrow and Thursday. We got street epistemologists, and they have their own mental models that they kind of cohere around. And doxastic openness, closure, Socratic method, aporia. And maybe I'll just run by one in each tribe. So doxastic openness is basically an openness to revise one's belief, and a closure is like a lack of openness. And the rationalist tribe, which will be here Thursday, they got Bayes' theorem, the UG field, reality is normal. They got a wonderful set of mental models. I highly recommend checking them out. Reality is normal is the one I quite like. Basically, anytime you come across something that's like, oh my God, like a surprise, or just like you can't believe it's real, perhaps you just need a new mental model available to you to help kind of understand what is happening, because reality in essence is normal, as they say. Game B, our friends at Game B, they have a slew of mental models that they often use. Generator functions. I get kind of worried when I listen to Daniel Schmachtenberger talk and I don't hear him mention the generator functions. I like, what's going on? Omni-win, collective intelligence. So the mental model omni-win is that if anything is a benefit for yourself, the people around you, and society as a whole, that is considered an omni-win decision or move. And our friend John Vervaeke, who's a one-man Memetic tribe, he's, if you watched his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, he has a slew of mental models. There's like pages, glossaries of all of the ones that he uses. The meaning crisis, of course, the 4 Ps of knowing, propositional, procedural, perspectival, and participatory, and bullshit in the philosophical sense. Harry Frankfurt used the word bullshit to describe when someone is not being truthful, but he may say something that is true, but he's speaking purely to persuade without care of the truth. And when someone does that, that's considered bullshit. And then, as John Vervaeke says, we are drowning in an ocean of bullshit. So next slide. And the idea here, I'll just conclude this, is in order to really understand a Memetic tribe, it's really good to get a sense of what mental models they use. So the benefits of using mental models, we have 5 of them. First one is navigating reality. Second one is harmonizing minds. Third is memetic mediation. Second or fourth is mental model sex. And then 5, and probably the least important, sounding smart. So let's go for the first one, navigating reality. And there's 2 things I'll explain here. Reality grokking with a transperspectival mind. So grokking is sort of a mental model. It's getting an intuitive sense on something. And I find having a slew of mental models from across various disciplines really helps with grokking reality, getting an intuitive sense of what's happening. And it also provides what a lot of people in kind of the Game B space and metamodern space call transperspectival mind. It's looking at a phenomenon, reality, from multiple different perspectives, and having a toolbox or latticework of mental models to look at a certain phenomenon with really helps with the transperspectival mind. And so if you get this intuitive sense of reality, you can look at it from multiple perspectives. It helps you navigate reality. And here's a graphic I quite like. Some guy with a knife is chasing another guy, and then it's being shown as the opposite way on this through this perspective. So if you just have this mono perspectival view and just watching it through this screen, then you're not going to get the full extent of what's actually happening. You need to look at different perspectives to get a sense of it, and mental models help with that. So let's move to benefit number 2.
So another benefit is harmonizing minds. And for this, I'll say, who doesn't want a harmonious mind? I find that when you have a bunch of mental models at your disposal, the right ones emerge when you need them. So you can almost imagine you're groping around in a dark, smoky space and you don't even know where the solid floor is. And you take a step onto one mental model and it supports you. And then from there, you can kind of like find the next one. And then you link a series of these together in a way that creates a certain amount of intellectual harmony when faced with some complexity or some uncertainty. And that's what this quote is in service of. The best mental model is the one that gets you to the next. But there's a second point for this, which is not only can mental models help you harmonize your own mind, but they're good for harmonizing the minds of others. So I'm sure we've all experienced when you've been in a room and you're having a group discussion with people, and maybe you're circling around some sort of philosophical nexus point, and people haven't really pointed out what it is yet, but you're getting closer and closer to something. And then somebody comes along and says like, oh, that's the whatever, whatever. And they put like some term for it or some mental model for it. And they consecrate the thing that was emerging into something that everybody else can reflect upon. And now they see, and it creates a certain amount of conversational harmony. And that's another really powerful benefit of mental models.
Benefit number 3, memetic mediation. And I called memetic mediation the hard problem of the culture war. This is essentially getting two people or a group of people in conversation with one another, two memetic tribes, if you will, or tribalists to be in conversation. And this is an illustration of Jordan Peterson and ContraPoints dancing together. And I had an illustrator who was actually in this course draw this. And this is my dream conversation at the STOA. It might happen. As people know, Jordan Peterson was my therapist. Actually, was Daniel's therapist too. That's how we met. Jordan Peterson introduced us, and ContraPoints has been at the STOA, and she's coming back Monday, I think, with Chomsky. So this could be a realistic conversation. I can't wait. But the conditions need to be right, and for these kind of conversations, difficult conversations, to emerge. And in order for one to be a good memetic mediator, they need to have a sense of what mental models kind of the person's worldview comes from in order to speak to them in an authentic way, and perhaps code switch in such a way where you can speak to both of them at the same time. And the next one, mental model sex. Ooh. I think this is Daniel's favorite. So this is what happens when mental models make love. If you read my journals, you know I'm like always making up terms all the time. And I think having an awareness of many mental models, you become like a connoisseur of how to coin them, how to kind of like word them. And in creating a good mental model not only helps describe a phenomenon, but it also could be an attractor to certain people to understand that phenomenon. Because the word might exist, but that word like might be outdated or might not resonate anymore. So kind of like coining a new term really draws people to the phenomenon. And I remember I was talking to John Vervaeke about this, about how he coined the meaning crisis, and it was like it's like the right phrase at the right time helps draw the right people. And having the capacity to know a bunch of mental models helps you create a new one. And then at the end, we'll direct you to a really good concept of how to have mental model sex. It's called concept unfolding. That comes from our friend Nicholas Benjamin. All right.
So the final benefit we have here is sounding smart. And this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also valid. Sometimes you need to cheaply signal your competence. So maybe you're at a networking event, maybe you're trying to endear yourself to someone of high status, and knowing a few mental models can be really helpful with this. Mental models, by definition, are very compressed ideas. So in a very small piece of language, you're able to convey quite a lot of insight. And having mental models in the back of your mind, you can pull them out when needed in a way that can be very intellectually engaging. Now, obviously, name dropping isn't always a good thing. And the key is to do this very tastefully, to do it artfully. And if you're going around and just listing all these mental models that you have in your head, it might backfire and lead to some of the failure modes of mental models, which we'll get into next. So we're going to go into 3 failure modes. The first is kind of the dark side of sounding smart with mental models, which Peter will explain. And the next is lazy thinking. And the final one is disembodied thinking, which I'll explain.
All right. So as Daniel said, mental models can make you sound smart, but they can also make you sound super pretentious. And people will, if you just rely on them, people will not know what the heck you're talking about. So this is an actual sense-making whiskey/cigar meeting with Daniel, our good friend Khalil. We have these often. And this is an actual conversation. I'll read it. So this is Daniel. Brah, you're totally playing a finite game with all that decision fatigue and hyperbolic discounting. Nah, brah, I am totes in the infinite game. Just watch me net play to increase my surface luck area in support of the protopia. And then I go, but brah, are you sure your ontological design skills are Lindy? You still need to grok the meta pattern of your desire path. So if you have no idea what this means, neither do we, so don't worry. But there is a tendency when you kind of get excited by a mental model and then you use it, then you start just speaking in mental models. And this could help kind of like progress conversations amongst friends, but to outsiders, it's just sort of like alienating. And as Benita Roy likes to say, in this space, we gotta cut the epistemic fat. And I like to tease Benita, the phrase epistemic fat is itself epistemic fat. But so this is a failure mode. So something to be mindful of.
Epistemic fat can also be tasty. And one thing I'll say about the previous slide is that, it's a joke, but it's actually not that far from some of our conversations. So something to keep in mind. So failure mode number 2 is lazy thinking. And for this, I am referring to Jordan Hall's distinction between authentic thinking versus simulated thinking. So authentic thinking is when you actually have a deep sense of unknowingness about a problem space and you're genuinely pursuing the truth. So you're in an exploratory mode. And when you're in this mode, all your habits of thought act in service of this exploration. And almost nobody does this. This is actually quite cognitively demanding. It's quite rare. And it's something that we all need to cultivate. It's hard to do. Most of the time people do the other thing, which is simulated thinking. And this is more when your thoughts are coming together in a way that seem coherent, and maybe all the mental models are clicking quite nicely. And it looks like you're pursuing the truth. It looks like you are trying to solve a problem. But in actuality, there's some sort of concealed goal that maybe you don't even know that has nothing to do with understanding reality. And what I'll say is if you have a lot of mental models in your head, you can become a really effective, authentic thinker, but you can also become a really effective simulated thinker. It can amplify whatever disposition you find yourself in. So this is something to keep track of. The next failure mode is similar, but there's a subtle distinction here, which I want to make. And for this, I kind of want to go back to the broader premise for this presentation. We want to be live players, and that means we want to navigate reality and make decisions in reality earnestly. We want to do it with authentic thinking, and we don't want to follow scripts. One of the ways in order to increase the odds that you're a live player is to make sure that you never avoid valid signals of truth. And there are some valid signals of truth that have more to do with your body than they have to do with your mind. If you're in this room, if you're taking this course, there's a good chance that you're more cerebral than the average person. If you really like mental models, that's also a sign that you're more cerebral. And what I mean by that is you privilege propositions as your primary mode of knowing things. If you have a lot of mental models in your head, then you could just stay in your head and you could just stay in this propositional world that isn't actually a good representation of reality. And so there's a Zen parable here, which is a finger points to the moon, but do not confuse the finger for the moon. This is kind of a rephrasing of the map is not the territory. Do not confuse the mental model for reality. Pay attention to other things that don't lend themselves to language. For instance, you get like a physical feeling about something. There's just a vibe that is off. There's no mental model to represent that, but that's still a valid signal of truth. So next, we're actually going to get into some practical things you can do to start using mental models. And Peter's going to show a demo for a couple of these items, but I'm just going to set the stage first. And these are things you can actually do right now in this presentation. So this will be really, really useful. The first thing is you need a second brain. And this is just a fancy way to refer to something external to you that can store your mental models. So this could be as simple as a spreadsheet. In fact, I recommend that. Or it could be something more complicated, like a really sophisticated Evernote or Notion database. And if you're interested in that kind of stuff, that Tiago Forte, I'd say, is kind of like the leader on that digital note-taking space. And he has a course called Building a Second Brain, which I'm kind of referring to here with this reference. The second is spaced repetition. And this is all about getting the mental models into your first brain. Spaced repetition is a technique for surfacing flashcards right at the point you're about to forget the content on them. And studies show it's the most efficient way to train things into long-term memory. And this will become more clear when Peter shows the demo. And then the final is a GTD bucket. So GTD stands for Getting Things Done, which is David Allen's classic book on productivity. I still think it's the answer for all your productivity problems. We're stealing a concept from that, which is having a bucket to collect your mental models. at the moment they arise, at the moment that you encounter them. So you see a mental model in this presentation. What do you do with that? Well, you need a GTD bucket for that. And now Peter will show you what some of those things look like.
All right, so the screen, just pivot. And then, yeah, Daniel and I are like total geeks on GTD. He's an actual coach on it. And I had this poster that I had when I was in my normal work world, like a GTD poster. So I swear by the methodology. It's really good. So yeah, let me share my screen. And so let's pretend that we're just in the wild of the internet, the noosphere wild, and we come across a mental model. So I'll kind of just like a method act that for you. Okay, bum, bum, bum. And you can see the screen, live player, dead player, Daniel. Cool. So let's say I'm reading an article by our boy Samuel Berja, live player, dead player. And I'm like, what? This is like a really jazzy term. What's going on here? I'm reading about it. And I come across this definition. A live player is a person or well-coordinated group of people that is able to do things that I have not done before. What? What? A dead player is a person or group of people that is working off a script and capable of doing new things. This is a really cool mental model. Like I gotta like, and I can't save this. So, I copy paste the definition. I'll go to, okay. So like I have Samo's definition. I go to this thing's an app called Things. Daniel introduced it to me. It's a really good GTD friendly app. As you see, there's a bunch of like task to-do lists, but there's a bucket there. So I already have some stuff that I need to process later. And a bucket is basically all the information, like Daniel said, that you just put in, then you process later. And so I'll add in live player and dead player. This is like really cool. I put the definition. There we go. So I'll process that later, which you'll see. And then let's just say after this, I'm like, okay, I go to the Stoa and I'm listening to a talk by Daniel Schmachtenberger. And so let's listen to a little bit of our friend here.
On the positive side, if you're doing well, if you're succeeding, if you're progressing, if things are going well for you in life, and I feel happy for you, that thing that we think of as empathetic joy, it's important to acknowledge that we don't have a word for that in English. Like we make words for concepts that we use. The idea of feeling joy at the joy of others, it's actually a core precept in Buddhism. Mudita is a Sanskrit term for empathetic joy, feeling delight at the delight of others. It's considered of the four virtues to cultivate, the kind of subtlest and highest of all the virtues. And we don't have a word for it in English because it's a phenomena that we don't even think about or focus on enough to make a word for it. The polyamory community had to make up a fake word, and it's compersion. And
what? Compersion? This is blowing my mind right here. I like the way it rolls off the mouth, Daniel's mouth. And so I'm going to write it in, compersion, and then I'll look it up later. And then let's say, so I got two cool new mental models, live players and compersion. Let's say I'm ready to kind of add them to my second brain, my mental model second brain. So here's a list of my mental models, personal mental models. And then there's the phrase, the mental model, and the definition. Let's see if I already have compersion here, which I'm pretty sure I do. Yeah, there I go. I have it. Compersion, the wholehearted participation in the happiness of others, repurposed from the poly community, which originally meant a feeling of joy when a loved one invests and takes pleasure from another. So that's super cool. So what do we do here? So we have a second brain of all these mental models. How do we practice them? So here is a method. So go to your space repetition app. I use Anki. Daniel, which one do you use? Again, I think that one was pretty good.
Yeah, there's something called Readwise. I'm going to put the links for both of them in the chat so you can explore it later.
Cool. So this is an Anki. This is a space repetition app. So let's say there's a way to add mental models. So I can just add like compersion. It already exists here. And then you do the definition, then you add it. But let's say I'm ready to sort of practice this. Okay, so we go to the mental models, we go study now. And then this is like cue cards, if you remember this in sort of like school, finite and infinite games. What's the definition? So I got to kind of think about the definition. Okay, so a finite game is when you work within rules and boundaries, and there's clear winners and losers. An infinite game is when you play with rules and boundaries, and the only rule is to keep playing. So let's see if I got that right. A finite game, blah blah blah. Yeah, that's pretty right. So this is pretty easy. Then I go, it's like, then you can do it again if you wanted to have this back. You can do it like 10 minutes, or you can do easy, and they have it shows up differently sometimes. So this is pretty easy, this one for me. So 4 days. Oh, look, our friend, live player, dead player. A live player is someone who, or live player is a person or group of people who can create something new. A dead player has to work off a script and only can create something that already exists. Show the answer. Boom, I got this one as well. What I do here is after I kind of like guess the second one, I go back to the first one that just happened, and then I hold the two together. So how do finite games and infinite games relate to live players and dead players? And then I try to make a connection, and this is where the creativity comes. This one's kind of easy. It's like dead players can only play finite games. Live players can play both finite games and infinite games. That's a cool kind of connection between the two mental models. And then these terms kind of come at you randomly. So this like mental models just randomly bump into each other, which is quite delicious. And then lots of insights can emerge from this. So like a meme, a unit of cultural transmission. So yeah, that is that. And I think that's it for this one. And then the idea is to just practice. You can just time block. I have it on my phone. You can do it like 10, 15 minutes a day, and then just put it in your memory. And then you're basically having idea sex in between when each model is presented to you. Anything I was missing there, Daniel?
No, I think you got that.
Cool. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Yeah, so that concludes our presentation. Other resources we recommend, Farnham Street has a really good mental model guide. Super Thinking, the book of big mental models by Gabriel Weinberg. Here it is right here. He's the guy that created DuckDuckGo, actually. Him and his wife have over 300 mental models in this book. It's quite good. I highly recommend Peter Wang's series on mental models of the STOA, 4-part series. The link is there, is really good. Nicholas Benjamin, our friend, he has a technique called concept unfolding, which is a pretty original way to have mental model sex. And this is a session at the STOA. And there's another book, The Personal MBA, Master of the Art of Business, has a really good slew of business mental models.
So in closing, I want to plug this super secret project that Peter and I are working on. And if you're interested in this type of thing, like with the mental models and particularly how to implement them and embody them, then you might be curious about what we have cooking. This is going to be focused specifically on that challenging piece of taking ideas from a conceptual space and then making them practiced and second nature. So if you're curious about that and you want to learn more, just fill out the form with your email and we'll let you know about it.
All right, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Secret Super Project at the end. But there we go, mental models. Hope you enjoyed that presentation. And what we're going to do now is we're having a Q&A first, right, Daniel? So yeah, we're here for 90 minutes in total. So let's have maybe a 15, 20-minute Q&A. So if you have any question, just put it in the chat, or if you have any comment that you'd like to make, feel free to do so. I haven't been reading the chats. I don't know who's been saying what. Daniel, have you been seeing anyone who had a good question?
Well, there's one right now, which is, how is this related to first principles thinking? And I can riff on this. This is a great question because on one level, first principles thinking is itself a mental model. And for those of you who don't know, it's when you get really, really clear on what your ground level assumptions are. And you say, these are the things that are true. And now I'm going to reason from there. And you try to avoid mental shortcuts by taking analogies or using other mental models that in a way that's out of place. And so that's why this is a good question, because first principles thinking is a mental model that also can dampen the usage of mental models. It's important to keep in mind that you could be doing the whole simulated thinking thing if you're not reasoning from first principles. But what I'll say is you can't always reason from first principles. Sometimes you don't have the time. So I would just say that's another approach, another tool to add to your cognitive toolkit.
Cool. Let's Shar, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Is one able to be embodied while using mental models, or is it so mental that you become disembodied?
Daniel, do you want to take that one?
The thing that comes to mind with this one is that some mental models, I think, encourage embodiment and some discourage it. And so I'm thinking about John Vervaeke's different types of knowing. I think that's a very useful mental model for avoiding the trap of spending too much time in the propositional space away from the body. And just a refresher, there's propositional knowing, but there's also participatory and procedural knowing and perspectival knowing. And knowing that there's different ways you can know things can remind you to pop out of your head. Maybe your question's geared to in the act of using the mental model, are you disembodied? And for that, I would say maybe there is that tendency, but I know that there are times where I feel very aligned, like as if there's like all my senses are kind of aligned and the mental model is just the thing that's like at the top of it. And I would say that feels different from when I'm just like running mental models in my head, and maybe one of them is embodied and the other one isn't.
I would add, so I have a proclivity, or I had the proclivity to like get into like escape velocity disembodiment or mental modeling. You just learn like you just like some abstract clouds. But what I try to do now, kind of any time really, is just really feel into my body when I discover something new and how it lands for me. And it really becomes embodied when, and we'll talk about this in a moment during the exercise portion, when you actually apply it and use it in a scenario. Like, remember, Shar, you mentioned cooperative overlapping versus interruptive overlapping, right? That's sort of a mental model. And so to describe it, like cooperative overlapping is when someone talks while you're talking, but it's to like support what you're saying. Like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Interruptive overlapping is a domination tactic that they interrupt you and they take over the conversation. That's a really cool, clean mental model. And I spotted, my memory, the felt sense of the memory of those moments come to mind when that model comes to mind now. But when it actually happens, that model kind of harmonizes my mind, like, oh, this is what's happening. And so that feels as a sense of embodiment when it's actually applied in life. Is
That helps. That's perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. Totally. And it kind of ties into just one follow-up question is we've been taking in so much rich information in this class and your STOA sessions and the Rebel Wisdom sessions. And then I watch additional supplementary information, and I'm wondering if like there's a limit to how much we can just keep intaking in the head. Like it's a lot of amazing information. And then do you take time? I'm just curious how others deal with it to process all of that and let it sink in and like connect with other things, because you can almost be getting hooked on just gobbling up more and more of this amazing information, you know? So I'm just curious how you feel.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm in the right relationship with this. I'm definitely trying to be. And the post-rationalist community, they call something called insight porn. When you get like an insight and you just get kind of like addicted to it, like, oh my God, it feels so delicious. And that's what kind of like could happen in these spaces when there's like a lot of cognitive abstract material. And I find like there was one point in the stoa, I was just zoning out all the time. It's like I can't take it anymore. Like this is interesting stuff. And so I'm really like double down on embodiment exercises for myself. And I'm trying to work on transition rituals. So every time I get out of like a cognitive heavy space, I do an embodiment exercise. Yoga Nidra, non-rest relaxation. There's like a westernized version of it. It's just basically a body scan is really helpful for that. So I'm trying to get into the right relationship with this. But to answer your question, I think that is definitely a failure mode.
Thank you. That really helps.
Do you want to add anything to that, Daniel?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I could tell in the chat that point resonated with a lot of people, and I wouldn't be surprised if some people, when they see these tactics like using Anki or building a second brain or whatever, it actually just makes things a little more overwhelming. My personal take on this is that you need a minimum set of tools to navigate the information ecology we find ourselves in. There's just so much information. And so that's become more complicated. And the average person's life has become a lot more complicated because of that. There's, the addiction business models of social media apps and things like that. And then there's like advertising, and then there's really good stuff hidden in between all of that. And what I'll say is the tools have also improved as well. So we have something like spaced repetition. We have something like Google Docs and Evernote. And this is one answer that probably works for a subset of people. Once you get really good at using those tools, you can just flow through a lot of that complexity. And I really believe in that, the power of that.
Great. Thank you both. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Shad. Timothy, you had, I'm curious just to hear your thoughts in general, and perhaps I think you pointed out a potential failure mode. And Timothy is going to be our facilitator this Thursday, and he represents the CFAR, the fine folks at CFAR.
Great, yeah, thanks. I love being able to have the concept of mental model and play with it and point to the different advantages and disadvantages. And one thing I was seeing in, especially in the chat, like some people like chomping at the bit to like, oh, let me just like take Peter's Anki model and like stuff it in my head or whatever. And I was noticing, I was imagining a possible pitfall there where the more that we kind of go at mental models for mental models' sake, it feels like there's more of a risk of accidentally dropping a lot of the contextual depth and the and some of the meaning and it edging a little bit more towards the bullshit side. And so I was curious to hear you guys speak to that.
Yeah, that's really great. I'll briefly comment. This is why I'm not sharing my spreadsheet. This is why I didn't share it last time. This is why I'm not going to share it, because I think everyone's sort of lattice work of mental model should be bespoke. It should be like what you're kind of drawn to, like what I call the diamond, or what we're kind of like you're intuitively interested in. And then this process, I think the psychotechnology that I present could be applied for anyone, but just your mental models that you're drawn to and the ones that you kind of stay with, I think should be bespoke and unique to each person. So you have your own kind of toolbox. And I do think there's like supermodels with this book, Super Thinking, called Supermodels, that, would be helpful for everyone to know. And we have a spreadsheet of 25 that Daniel picked out that he thinks are supermodels. But yeah, I'm curious if you have anything to add to that, Daniel.
Yeah, I think, Timothy, you highlighted something really important. In the upcoming exercise, we'll speak a little bit more about this, but I think it's important to take the extra step and think about, how is this abstract model going to apply to my life, like this week? And asking questions like that really helps bring the context back. And there's a little exercise that'll help with that in the final section.
Great, thanks, guys.
And I will also say that, treat this whole technology or thing that we presented as provisional. This works somewhat for us, but it could be improved upon, especially if all the other kind of different stuff that we present in the workshops could be integrated with it. So let's do maybe one or two more questions. Daniel, do you see any good ones? I think Anjan had a question, but I'm always nervous picking him. Anjan, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I think my question was in the same vein as Timothy. Let me see what my question was. Basically, like, why the brain naturally is going to forget things? Isn't that in some sense like its own prioritization mechanism? Like, if something is worth remembering, you'll remember it. If it's not, you'll collide into it again until you do. Like, what's the point of, like, is Anki overkill? What's the point of having this external process?
I have a thought on this. It's kind of related to what I was saying earlier about the information ecology. The incentives of the digital landscape are not in line with your highest goals in most cases. And so you can almost imagine that every time you encounter the internet, you are doing somebody else's Anki deck. You're gonna bump into other people's ideas for what might, their advertising goal or whatever it is. And so this is a way that you can kind of carve out a little space, a sacred space, where you're focusing on the things that you want to learn and You can almost like program yourself, if you like that metaphor, instead of letting the Twitter algorithm program you. What else will I add to this? Yeah, another piece to, I don't know if this is a mental model or this is just a memory aid, but I like to think of designing your environment for your highest goals, or designing for righteousness. And some of these tools, like a spreadsheet where all your favorite mental models exist, or an Anki deck, they're almost like a UI design for those goals. It's like right here, I'm just focusing on what matters most. So maybe in a more normal environment, you could trust your normal forgetting curves to allow you to encounter the things that are important to you. But nowadays, I don't think you can.
And I'll add to that. Like, and you're right, Anjan, like when I come across a model, I don't need to memorize it if it's a good one, like live player, dead player, just it sticks and it's there. But for the, the 5 benefits that we listed, like the latter 2 is really kind of this methodology is helpful for the latter 2. And mental model sex, kind of cross-pollinating these different mental models, trying to find connections. And it really just helps kind of like give with psychological and intellectual flexibility. And then sounding smarter, just sounding articulate, knowing how to articulate these mental models, which does help with the 3rd benefit, memetic mediation. Yeah, does that help, Anjan? Cool. So maybe a couple more questions. And if anybody, Daljit, you had a question or a thought to share?
Yeah, it's just interesting how, your idea of this bespoke curation, it makes a lot of sense. You kind of have to discover it for yourself. But then I remember you shared that document the other day and I was like, boy, I'd like to get my hands on that because I can bootstrap myself to all the great work Peter's already done and get up to speed, light speed. So it's like, I'm sort of torn by, that balance of, and it gets into 1st person, 2nd person, 3rd person epistemics. You're pulling a 3rd person into your 1st person, and what is the proper meshing back to 2nd person if there is one?
Any thoughts on that, Daniel?
I have a quick thought. Maybe it's like a modest answer, but I think sometimes I try to remind myself that I happen to be conscious of this particular slice of reality, and all of you are conscious of your own slices of reality, and they're unique and distinct from one another. And we all have little pieces of the puzzle. And if we're trying to download other people's mental model deck, then maybe we're not doing service to our little piece of the puzzle. So that bespoke approach is helpful for internalizing things that matter to you. But at the end of the day, we need your puzzle piece. So it's also relevant for the collective sense making.
I guess it just makes me think we need the metadoc, right? If we all have one of these and we then share that and we can correlate what the best mental models are collectively, would that be a collective bespoke curation?
Possibly, although there's probably an upper limit to that. I think every tribe or every scene has its own terms and jargon and mental models, essentially. And sometimes they don't need to be explicated. Like I imagine everybody here can talk to each other in a way that leverages a bunch of mental models and they don't even realize they're doing it.
Danny, you had a question?
Yes, hi. I have had so many people call me mental when I speak, and that it gets discounted, right? It's like for a certain slice of culture, mental just gets thrown out. And so my curiosity was, have you ever considered any other naming instead of calling all of this mental models? Because mental seems to be a bit limited for what all this is. So.
You want to take a crack at that one first, Daniel?
I don't know if this is helpful, but another term people use is cognitive tools. The thing I like about it is that it's accurate because, again, this is a cognitive thing and we need to remember that. But it's also a tool, and they need to be used. It's not just for the sake of like sounding fancy. But I don't know if that helps, because cognitive and mental are still very close.
And so the reason why we chose this mental model, just because it has some, popularity, people know about it. Charlie Munger, he's the guy that kind of popularized it recently, which I mentioned in last week's presentation. So that's kind of why we used it. And here's a mental model that I quite like. Boundary work, conceptual boundary work in academia is sort of like the work needed to demarcate different departments and disciplines from each other. And I was playing with this term in my journals, boundary play. All right, we can play with boundaries. Like, how much can we get away with and still it being the thing? And this is what I do with Stoicism all the time. This is why the modern Stoicism movement doesn't really like me, because they keep like boundary playing with what Stoicism can be. And I think you can do that with definitions as well. Like, okay, like Dave Chalmers has something called verbal disputes. And I think the rationalist taboo is similar to this, where it's like if there's like a disagreement with a word like racism or something, and then the people have like a somatic triggering, and then they just can't even have an engagement, drop the words for a moment, and then just level set on the definition of what you're trying to talk about, and then you can go forward. So it's the same thing. If there's like a word that's kind of triggering, or you're not, there's an allergy, like metamodernists call it philosophical allergies. It's often just a verbal dispute. You can just drop the word and then replace it with something else. So, I invite you, if mental models is not something that's you're vibing with, create something new.
Very helpful. This is good.
So let's do one more. Actually, perhaps I think we should pivot to the exercise now, because we have to do a 5-minute individual one. Do you want to set that up, Daniel?
Yeah. So we're going to get into a practical exercise. There's two. The first is an individual exercise that you can all do by yourselves. And I am going to show you what it looks like. So while I'm setting up my screens, I'll say, if you are someone who has a Google account, you probably need to log into it now. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. You just need a pen and paper. So I've created a mental model starter pack. Does everybody see this? It's a spreadsheet. Cool. And I'm going to share it in the chat in a second. But first, actually, let me share it so that you can follow along. So you should be able to access this link that I just dumped in the chat. And when you get to the page, yep, everybody's populating at the top, I want you to click File and make a copy, and then rename this to your own mental models deck. So right, Daniel's mental models, and then create a copy into your Google Drive. I'm not going to do this now, but basically it'll open this up in a way that you can edit, and it'll be your own. Now, if you don't have access to Google, and right now you can't see this, don't worry about it. You just need a pen and a piece of paper to do the next part. So just to orient you around this, it's very simple. We have the definition, and then we have a description. And there's a personal notes section here, which I'll explain now, but it'll come in the next exercise. This, I just put like a couple personal notes myself for why I picked these mental models, or how they might be relevant to my life. And I just want to share this now so it can get you thinking about how to use a deck like this. So let me give you an example. This is a good one. Hanlon's razor. It's a mental model. Never attribute to malice that which is most easily explained by stupidity. I wrote a little note, solves 80% of roommate problems. Now, this isn't statistically true. I haven't done the study, but this immediately tells me where I'm going to use this, and it makes it so much more likely to pop up in the situation when I need it. Okay, so for the exercise, for the solo exercise, you are going to add your own mental models to your own Google Sheet. So right at the bottom, I want you to add 3 mental models, and I encourage you to do so with just active recall. I'm pretty sure there are a few that popped up in your head throughout this presentation. Try your best to just remember what they are and put them down. Anything that isn't in this initial list of 20. If you're really stuck, then you can always do some Googling to help. And then add some tight definitions to it. If you can write your own definitions, that's better for memory, but if you have to go to Wikipedia, that's fine too. And we're just going to take 5 to 10 minutes to add our own mental models to our own starter pack lists. And once you have 3 and you're content with them, don't worry about the description part yet. Pick your favorite one with the word and the definition, just one, and put it in the chat. And once we have a few flowing in the chat, we'll know you guys are done and we can move to the next part of the exercise.
Is there any questions?
So Timothy said, we do this in our own spreadsheet. Yep. So you won't have edit access to the one I sent. You'll have to click file and then make a copy to create your own.
And if you're having technical difficulty, like setting this up, no worries. We're going to share the spreadsheet on Mighty Networks. And so in the meantime, you can just get like a pen and paper. You can write it down there. Or you can just have like a blank Google Doc or Word doc, and then you can just write it there because we're going to be sharing this, at least one of them soon. So we'll give 5-10 minutes. And then, yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat.
So someone asked, what were the column names? It was model, description, and personal note, or you can write name and definition. Those are the 2 that really matter for this purpose. So when you share your favorite model in the chat, if you can, include a really tight definition to go along with it so that people can update their spreadsheets if they want.
And I think we're going to pivot to group conversation now. So you get to save the chat at the end. A lot of amazing models pop up. If you have any ones, feel free to send them now, but we're going to pivot to group exercise. Danny, would you like to set that up?
Yeah, so the second exercise is going to be geared towards the embodiment side of things. And this is kind of tricky. So the best we can do with our time together is to get into a breakout room with 3 to 4 people and to share your favorite mental model from the previous exercise, and then have a round of reflections about this whole process, maybe some of your uncertainties about it or some of the things you're excited about. And then the action is going to be that you'll write your own personal note for how you're going to make your mental models real for you. So for the 3 that you wrote previously, you're going to add a personal note to the final column in a way that I described earlier. So with the Hamlin's razor, that solves 80% of your roommate problems. Another example is when I think of anti-fragility, I think about my life. Are there any anti-fragile parts of my life? Or are there any fragile parts of my life? I think about stoicism. And so I'm starting to make these connections. You each need to do that for yourself, and your life is going to look different from everybody else's. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now. I'm going to put the same instructions in the chat again, so you don't have to remember, but I'll repeat them. So first is share your mental models with your group, your favorite mental model, and then have just general reflections, a round of reflections on this presentation and anything else that's come up for you. And then together start writing your own personal notes for how you will make your models real for you. And with any extra time, feel free to just have a group discussion.
And if you have to slip out now, please do so, because I'm just arranging the room. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop off mute. And here's an invitation too. When you check in, kind of just check on your emotional state. How you doing? Are you feeling a little bit kind of frazzled? Are you feeling not here? Just kind of get embodied before you talk about your mental model. All right, see any questions, Daniel, or no?
No, I think we're good. How long? We'll do 10 minutes.
I I think 15 would be kind of good.
Okay.
If there's 4 people per group, and we just need about 5 minutes to close. All right, so I'll throw you in the rooms now. I think we have everyone back. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some good conversations. I was in here in the main room just reading all the mental models, so it was pretty awesome. I recommend saving the chat. There's some ones I think people just made some up too, which is cool, like doomer shift. I never heard that one before. It's like rephrasing a situation with the lens of X-risk, which is really cool. I'm going to add that to my mental model stack. Daniel, we'll get some shares in a moment, but Daniel, any thoughts or kind of anything you'd like to share from your group?
Yeah, one of the themes that came up was this theme of embodiment, and the thing I want to share is it was actually something Ian was talking about, where he was describing his sense of excitement around the live player, dead player concept. And what I loved about that, he told a story about how he noticed that he was getting very excited about this concept. What I love about that is that's not something people tend to notice. You know, we don't tend to notice what's going on physically when we encounter concepts. So one thing I'll just highlight and share back with everyone: pay attention to how you physically feel when you're making your own list. Don't just like arbitrarily grab things because they sound cool or because Elon Musk said it or Peter Limberg said it or whatever. Just follow that felt sense, physical excitement, intuition, and I think you'll have a better chance at embodying these.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, and John Vervaeke and I talked about this a few times, is that like these terms or mental models are not just descriptors of reality, but they're also like a beacon for others. Like there's something, if something resonates with you about hearing this term, whatever it is, then there's something there to explore, and it's usually an embodied response. And that's basically how David Fuller and I came upon this term. We were figuring out what this course was going to be about, what to call it, and then we just kept returning to live player. We were using that in our speech and describing the course, and we're like, why don't we use this term? So we asked Samo, and he was cool with it, and then we used it, and then I imagine the people who are here, something about that term, live player, and perhaps the dichotomy, you know, the provocative dichotomy spoke to you, hence why we're here. So let's get maybe a couple of shares from groups before we officially close out. I think we could just do popcorn style, maybe get 3 or 4. Just pop off mute and share some thoughts. I'm kind of interested in Carl Smith. You have lots of cool mental models. I remember when you first came to the STOA. I wonder if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I guess my share was one that I picked up from a life review. So I had this crazy life review, and my life stopped and it went in reverse, and I had this episodic memories, and I went back my entire life, and it was like 40 years in my perception, but 1 hour in real time, and I got this ability to shift, or became aware of the fact that I could shift out of point of view and go into field of view. So I was able to go into, the first thing I tried was to go into a table, and I was in my consciousness and the table's consciousness, so in this double consciousness. And then I went into other people, became them, etc., etc. So in my normal life now, I'm conscious of this point of view to field of view, and I'm always conscious of who I spend time with, where I go, what I consume as information, because maybe in the death state, I'll have this unfolding where I'm able to basically inhabit all of those other areas in my life.
Yeah, and if you haven't checked out Carl's work, Carl's a mad genius. He came to the STOA and talked about double consciousness, and I think it was ontological diversity. I think that was the other. Like, I just love that. Can you maybe explain what ontological diversity is?
Yeah, I mean, we've just been talking about it in our little group. I guess it's like, how do we learn from more intelligent species like the mycelium? You know, all this intelligence underneath our feet everywhere we go. We're not able to sort of connect with it. But what if we could understand that our consciousness, we talked about different ways of knowing, what about different ways of perceiving, different types of consciousness that we are not privy to? And how can we sense like a mycelium network? How can we sense like a forest? So that's what my work's about, is like, you know, how do we embody the other? And and then the counter to that was, how do I treat others? If that's the question, how do I treat others? Answer, there are no others.
Yeah, very cool. If you want your mind blown multiple times, I recommend checking out some of Carl's stuff. I posted a session at the Stoa. Yeah, maybe get 1 or 2 more shares in. Just feel free to pop off mute. Someone, Kim, you have your hand up. If you can unmute yourself.
Hi. So something really wondrous happened in our breakout group. We started sharing each of our favorite mental models, and then Stefan came up with a metaphor in a way, and we spontaneously moved into glass bead game in a way. And so I feel that mental models just had sex with glass bead game.
That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear coming up.
It was righteous.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, think about it. That's a good mixture. I should talk to Lawrence about kind of infusing the two. Thank you for that, Kim. Anyone else would like to maybe one last share? Nicholas, you got your hand up.
Yeah. So in our group, I shared something that I've been doing quite a bit recently, just with some friends. I mean, they are like my nerdy friends, let's say, and we just go meta everything. So it's like the mental model is called meta everything, and you just go out and you just say meta this, meta that, meta whatever. And often it's just fun and it's a joke, but then you'll hit one and it's like, oh shit, a meta, who knows what, a meta cup. What could a meta cup be or whatever? And it opens the space for the imaginal. And it's like, yeah, you can really get really creative, and it's very playful, right? So since this is mental model play, I thought we could end it with something like that, very practical and fun.
Very cool. Yeah, Nicholas is involved in this community for a while now, and when you're involved in this community, you can't help but like create your own like mental models, or your own games. So cool. We're at the bottom of the hour, so I want to respect everyone's time. Daniel, any closing thoughts on your end?
I just have some things to share. So that link with the starter pack of mental models, I've also made into an Anki deck. Anki was the spaced repetition thing that Peter was demoing. So if you want to check that out and you want something to get you started, here is a link where you can download the deck. And then if you go to the Anki website, or if you Google Anki, you can actually download the app if you don't have it. And with that, I encourage you to modify the definitions, make it your own, but this might get you kickstarted on it. And the other thing I'm going to share again is the link to our super secret project. And if you want to know about that, then you can sign up here.
And just to hype up that super secret project a little bit more, so at the Stoa, we're going to do sort of like artistic experiments, and Daniel and I are going to do one. Not particularly on mental models, there's going to be a facet there, but it's, yeah, I don't want to spoil it. So, and if you're interested, if you like what you had today, you're definitely going to like this thing. So feel free to put your email in that form. And thank you so much, Daniel, brother Daniel, for coming to the Rebel Wisdom course, helping us out. That was beautiful. Daniel is a coach on getting things done and building a second brain. He's basically upped my productivity game tenfold. So you can check out his stuff at his website. Yeah, so this concludes the first workshop. And again, like, make your own methodology. This was just something that Daniel and I use, a method that we use, but you can create your own method and have fun with it, live play with it. Tomorrow, I think Timothy and all the street epistemology people left, but tomorrow we're having someone from street epistemology. We're having a group of people, actually. Anthony Magnabosco and his crew are coming in, which should be a super cool session. It's really getting a sense, like a technique to get the sense of your epistemic methodology and other people's epistemic methodology, how they come about to believe how they believe, what they believe to be true. And then we're going to have Timothy, who was speaking before from CFAR, to come into a rationality thing. So that should be super fun. So yeah, awesome session today, everyone. Daniel, everyone, thanks for coming. So let's jump off mute, make some noise, share some love, and then we'll close out.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a
Thanks,
good
everyone.
Thanks so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.